and we are continuing on with balance. We've already talked about symmetrical balance. Symmetrical balance is dividing a paper right smack down the middle, and everything on the right side is a mirror image of whatever's on the left side. Asymmetrical balance sets things off a bit. Asymmetrical balance is more interesting. It's more visually exciting. We can adjust the fulcrum on the seesaw and affect the center of gravity. But just being off center doesn't create balance. You have to think of visual weight differently. Positive space is heavier than negative space. Lots of filled space needs to be balanced by empty space. Darker values are heavier than lighter values. Asymmetrical balance is informal, and it takes into account such qualities as hue, intensity, and value, in addition to the size and the value. All of these qualities have an effect on the apparent weight of the object in the piece. All of these are asymmetrical balance. Starry night, we have this large vertical that's offset by this bright moon. This one divided down the middle. If you were to get rid of this thing that I think looks like a purple olive, it would be completely off balance. We have the two pieces of cake that one is larger, less colorful, but it's offset by the smaller one that's in full color. This is a more complex drawing full of directionals, some large areas offset by this smaller piece over here with more interest going on here. It's perfectly balanced, but it's not symmetrical. We also have radial balance. Radial balance is circular. When you split it in half, you have a symmetrical design. Circular designs are very often associated with a spiritual meaning, like in a dream catcher. The elements radiate out from a point in the center of the work. This logo for Chakwa Coffee is incorporating a radial balanced segment into it, but the logo itself is not completely radial. It is not exactly a symmetrical piece, because if you notice, the steam, quote unquote, that's coming off of the cup does not go straight up the middle. It's got a wave to it. So this is not completely symmetrical. It does incorporate a radial design within it. Our fifth principle is movement. Good design controls how the eye moves us through the composition. Lines can help direct us through it. The principle of movement goes back to the idea that good design controls the eye's flow. The flow of line can move the eye across the page or across a screen. We often take advantage of how we are conditioned to read top to bottom, left to right, and a good directional is going to help us along. Or it can take us in a different direction. When you look at this ketchup bottle made up of sliced tomatoes, do you start at the top or do you start at the bottom? How about this row of miniature squash? It leads you left to right, but it leads you from the bottom to the top. How about these canoes or kayaks, I guess those are, that lead you across the page? Here's a lovely example leading you from the front all the way to the back, but we're going up. Arrows can help us locate our focal point as well. Remember patterns? Rhythm is created by setting a pattern in the elements that we use. Rhythm happens when you repeat one or more visual element with consistency. It's like tapping your feet to music, or clapping or dancing. Rhythm isn't limited to a single page. Rhythm can use a sequence of visual elements at a prescribed interval across formats, like web design, magazines, motion graphics, to provide continuity as well as variance to create visual interest. there can be variation in the repetition. This is simple repetition, but by making some adjustments, moving sizes, changing colors, we develop a sense of rhythm. Unity seems a little like an abstract idea after all the other principles and elements, but it is the idea that all of the parts work together and everything looks like it belongs together. Just like you wouldn't wear a formal to dig in the garden, because there's no unity between gardening and formal wear. A design is going to have unity when the different parts have visual links or relationships with each other. There's some consistency in the pattern of type, using the same font, using the same style of visuals, repeating columns. Unity implies there is a oneness to the design. The result of the design is cohesive. We're going to talk a little bit about Gestalt. Gestalt is a school of psychology that was founded in 1920s by a group of German psychologists who studied how the human brain perceives objects. They discovered that the brain automatically and unconsciously simplifies and arranges and orders objects that the eye sees. Specific patterns of perception emerged from the research, which became the Gestalt laws. The basic premise of Gestalt is that an assembly of elements is perceived as more than the sum of its individual parts. An overall pattern takes precedence over the individual elements that make up that pattern. So designers use these laws in their layouts. The first thing is good figure. That just means that we've got a grouping of items. We see them as one group, not as the individual items. So we see a rack of shirts in a store. It's a rack, not 59 individual shirts. The next one is proximity. We perceive objects that are close together as belonging to the same group. There is a related law called the law of common fate that says we perceive objects moving in the same direction as part of the same group. In our example, we perceive the two columns on the right as being one group because of how close they are together. The ability to group content aids in creating organization and ordering layouts. Placing items in proximity to each other goes back to clumping. The idea is to avoid a busy, cluttered layout by physically grouping items together that belong together. Here's a few more examples. In proximity here we have 3 groups because they're next to each other. But within those groups, in the first group, we have 2 groups. A group of 3 and a group of 6. How about in this one? They're close to each other, the colors are different, but we group these together because of the closeness rather than the similarity between the colors. How about this one? It's getting more complex because not only do we have different colors, we also have different shapes. But we group because of proximity. We can group because of similarity. So our second law is similarity. Our mind groups things together that have similar properties, like color or shape. We're grouping circles and we're grouping triangles. Squares with squares, circles with circles. Do you group the objects by color or by shape? In layout, we can use similarity to create order and organization because of unity. There's a couple more laws that we have that we'll be going into. I've got examples here: continuity and closure. Our minds in continuity will continue a pattern beyond its ending point. Our eyes will follow the direction of a line. Do you see 4 groups of dots, or do you see a line? We see a straight line with a curved line going through it. Even though the colors change, we tend to group because it's going in the same direction, just like on this image where we have what appears to be a line cutting through the circles. We connect those and perceive it as a line rather than perceiving this as a C and 2 half circles and a dot. Just like on this letter H, we have this nice line going through connecting to the maple leaf. Applying this concept to your design can create a sense of direction and a sense of movement to our layout. We call it flow. The law of closure. We mentally fill in the gaps in order to complete a perceived shape. In the top example, you don't just see dashed lines, you see a square, you see a circle, you see a triangle. In the example below, you don't see some weird shapes that are odd, you see a shark. The idea of designing with only a part but having your viewer perceive the whole opens up interesting compositional opportunities, including this interplay of positive and negative space. Applying your Gestalt principles can help control the viewer's journey through your design and make it more interesting. Visual hierarchy will tell the viewers what's important along the way.